Okay, cool. I'll send you the link
Okay.
right now. Okay, while I getting the link to send it to you, I'm kind of just gonna start us off. I want to just thank you, Ahmed, for being here, for engaging in this conversation with us. We have been doing a lot here at PAC for the census, and the deadline did actually get, I just sent you the link in the chat. The deadline actually did get moved up to end of September instead of end of October. So we actually have even less time to mobilize our communities and to make sure that we are all counted. And so this is coming at a perfect time. So on behalf of PAC, we're really grateful that you're here and facilitating this conversation with us. I'm going to do just a brief introduction, although I think our community knows you very well. But Amer Zahr is an Arab American comedian, speaker, writer, academic, and adjunct professor at University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. He draws on his experiences growing up as a child of Palestinian immigrant parents, performing and lecturing on topics like politics, society, Islam, growing up Arab, and more. So again, we're really excited that you are here for this conversation with us. What I'm going to do is I have a couple questions that I'm going to ask and start our conversation off that way. And then we're going to open it up to whoever is watching us live or here on the Zoom link with us. If anyone has any questions, comments, or things that they would like Amer to address, please feel free to drop them in the chat or in our comments, and I will keep an eye on those and then ask those at the end after we went through the questions I have prepared. So kind of just to start us off, kind of a question, but just as an introductory for folks who maybe still aren't too aware. Amer, do you mind just kind of giving us a brief, just general overview of what is the census and what is this word that we keep hearing and talking about?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. I'm excited to be here with you, Abir, and with PAC, and hopefully everybody out there that's watching. So that we do the census because it's in the Constitution. So the Constitution requires a counting of persons every 10 years. And so we've been doing censuses in this country since 1790. And to be clear, the Constitution says to count people, so everybody. And this is done for the purposes of apportioning congressional representatives. Over time, of course, the census data has become the sort of clearest and most dependable data that we have to look at different communities. And so it's used for all kinds of things, from federal funding to minority contracting to apportioning representatives, all kinds of stuff. Billions and billions of dollars flow out of the federal government based on census number. And then, of course, for a long time, well, really since the beginning, but the categories have changed, they have counted, they have asked people to denote what their race is. And so this kind of stuff has been happening now for centuries in this country. And of course, Arab Americans are in a sort of peculiar position where we've never had our own box and we've been considered white, but we're not white, but I'm sure we'll talk about that too.
Yes, those are actually some of the questions that we have, and a question that someone actually gave us in preparation for your talk. So maybe we can just jump right into that and go from there. I have two questions kind of related to this race portion and how do we fill this out and how do we get represented. But I want to start first actually with just a general kind of conversation of what does representation really mean? What does it matter? What does it do for us? What do we lose if we aren't represented? I know you kind of started touching on it, but I think we're kind of at the point of wanting to emphasize all the things that we stand to lose if we don't have enough of this representation.
Yeah, so this time around, as Arab Americans, we're going to be actually counted in the census numbers for the first time, not in an ideal way, not in the way that we really want to be, but we will be counted for the first time. And so what that means is just take the simple example of talking to one of your congressional representatives. So a congressional representative in the House represents roughly 750,000 people. So if you can in New Jersey, or we can in Michigan, or someone in Ohio or California or Florida or anywhere, can now go with census numbers to this representative and say, hey, the census is now telling us that there are 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 Arabs that live in your district. Well, because we've never had those numbers before. Well, that politician, because politicians are politicians, is much more likely to respond positively to our concerns when they see that we are a number. And it doesn't have to be a huge number, but when they see that we're a number, that is going to be something that's going to be very effective in having much more political power than we've had before.
Yeah.
To me, that's the most important part of making sure that we all fill out the census. Yes, there's other things like having the numbers for people who might do academic research, having the numbers for people who are doing healthcare and that kind of thing. All these things are important. For me, the most important part of it is getting politicians to respond more positively to our concerns. Those numbers are going to be very, very important for that.
Yeah, definitely. So then continuing on this conversation of representation and how to get properly represented, I have a couple of questions, and I want to start off with the first question that we got from a community member actually is, why are Arabs considered white in the US? And then going off of that, then how should we, and how do you suggest us filling out this portion of this census under race if we don't want to put white, and if that's not how we identify?
Okay, so let me answer the first question, because this is exactly what I teach on, and I'll be as brief as possible because people write books about this. So from the beginning of America, when they first started doing laws that determined naturalization, like how somebody becomes a citizen, when they passed the first naturalization law in 1790, the Congress declared that in order to become an American citizen, you had to be white. That was in the law. And they didn't define what white meant. They just said white. And that was the law in America for naturalization from 1790 all the way until 1952. Okay. So for the first, 160 years of America, you had to be white in order to become a citizen. It's only been just under 70 years that you haven't had to be white to become a citizen. And so what happened was, in the beginning, obviously, it was clear. There was white people, there were black people enslaved until 1965. There were Native Americans. But then immigrants started showing up in the late 1800s. And all of them, in order to get naturalized, applied for whiteness. All of them. Japanese people, Chinese people, they all tried to convince the federal government that they were white. They failed. Indians from India tried to convince the federal government that they were white. Native Americans tried to convince the federal government that they were white. And Arabs, when they started coming, and they were mostly coming from what they called Syria at that time, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Syria area. And they were almost entirely Christian. We're talking in the early 1900s. They petitioned for whiteness. Well, we're the only group that there was a sort of conflict in the courts and judges in whether or not they thought we were white. And so there were court battles for this. And we eventually were determined to be white by courts that were right under the Supreme Court. And so we were deemed white for naturalization purposes. And then when they started coming up with racial categories in the federal government in this office called the Office of Management and Budget, they defined white as people originating from Europe and the Middle East and North Africa. So we are white because of that, because we fought for it, because that was the only way you got into America. So if those first Arabs didn't fight for that whiteness, they would have been denied citizenship. Okay. Now, there also were, that was in the teens, in the 19-teens. There were also some Arabs who showed up in the 40s who were Muslim, and they said, well, we're white, let us in. And And the courts told them, no, you weren't what we meant when we said white. And they were also kind of they were from like Yemen and Saudi Arabia area. And even when they were determining whether or not the Syrians were white when they came 100 years ago, judges were writing opinions talking about the color of their skin. Well, this one looks not too brown. This one looks, one judge even called one of the Arabs that was in front of him. He says his skin looks like the color of a walnut. Okay, like, I mean, like these were actual things they wrote about us to determine whether or not we were white. And the fact that they did insert many times the fact that they were Christian as a sort of way that made them white. Because look, the history of America is very clear. Americanness has equaled white European Christianity. And that has molded a little bit over the years, but that's basically been the notion of what is an American. And we see a lot of that resurfacing today. And so we're white because we fought for it, because that's the only way that you could get in, okay? In 1965, from 1952 to 1965, the immigration systems changed drastically. And by that time, whiteness was removed as a prerequisite for naturalization and getting into America. And so that's when you saw the second wave of Arab immigrants in the 60s and 70s coming to America. But the classifications at the highest level of government, including the Office of Management and Budget and the Census Bureau, weren't changed. So we are still to this day considered white in federal government guidelines. But of course, we don't function as white in society. Obviously, when an Arab, you know, if you go out and commit a crime, they're not going to call you that white lady that committed a crime. You know, that's just not going to happen. And so we are still in this quandary of white, but white legally, but not white in society. That's caused a lot of legal problems for us over the years. Now, what should you do on the census? This year, for the first time on the census, it used to be that if you checked other and you wrote in an Arab country, they would make you white, and your country that you wrote in would get lost in the sort of the compilation of the data. Okay, but that's not happening this year. This year, they're actually asking people for the first time to delineate what kind of white person they are. Okay, so you can check, if you check white and you write Palestinian, they're going to count you. However, if you check other and you write Palestinian, they will also count you as a Palestinian. They'll just reclassify you as a white Palestinian. So what I'm encouraging people to do, because I don't believe we're white. I made a documentary movie called We're Not White. I did a comedy tour for 5 years called We're Not White. So if you don't believe that you're white and you feel uncomfortable checking that, then check other. And I'm asking people to write in their country. Don't write Arab, and definitely don't write Middle Eastern, because that's not a thing. So don't write Arab, and write in your country, because here's the thing. I want to get I want to look at the data from, you know, when it all comes out in a year from now. Okay, so like take you, Abiyat, are you Palestinian?
I'm Lebanese.
Lebanese, okay, so you should check other and write in Lebanese, because when I get that data, I'm gonna see, okay, that's a person in New Jersey that wrote Lebanese. And so I'm gonna now know that you're also an Arab. So I'm gonna know that there's an Arab person who identifies as Lebanese in New Jersey. But if you just wrote Arab, I won't know what kind of Arab you are. And it's important to me to know that you're Arab, which I'll know from your country, but also to know your country as well, because different communities have different needs, maybe different political needs, different social needs. And so we want to know how many Arabs there are overall, but we also want to know how many Arabs there are from each country or region. So don't just write Arab, write in your country. That'll give us activists and academics and community centers like PAC the best data to work with when this all comes out. So check other and write in your country. And by the way, if you are, first of all, you have to do it for everyone in your house. So if you have 6 people living in your house, you should be putting six other Palestinians or other whatever on the census form, not just once. That's important. And if you are mixed, so let's say you're Palestinian and your mom or dad, you know, you have one parent who's Palestinian and one parent who's white or Latino or black or whatever, do both of those things. So check, if you want to check, let's say your dad is from Chile and your mom is from Palestine. Well, you can check the Latino box and write Chile, and you can check the other box and write Palestinian, and they'll both be counted. So you'll be counted as a Palestinian and as a Latino. So you don't have to pick and choose on the census. You can pick more than one. So let's say, for instance, let's say your dad was Lebanese and your mom was Italian, and both of my parents are Palestinian. Well, you fill out the census and you check, white Italian and other Lebanese, and I write the census and I only write other Palestinian. Well, we'll end up with two people, one Italian person, one Lebanese person, and one Palestinian person, right? But you happen to be both the Italian person and so you can mix on the census. That's important for people to know. You don't have to pick and choose either. So that's the basics of it.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder about the mixed identities too. We have a couple of questions coming from this conversation. So the first one is, you said don't put Middle Eastern, but they are pushing for MENA, so Middle Eastern, North African. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't like the term Middle Eastern because it's a colonial term. It means east of white people. We didn't come up with it ourselves. It was invented by an American general who said that he traveled to the east, which was China, and somewhere across the middle, he saw us. And so we're Middle East. And you have these terms of East and West, which, remember, Edward Said always rejected as fake constructs to describe differences between civilizations and not. So I don't like the term MENA. Now, if we had a MENA category on the census, that'd be better than being lumped in with white people. But the best case scenario would be to have an Arab American, or maybe one day we can have it called Middle East, North African, and Arab, or something like that. But it doesn't really matter for this time around because 2020, we don't have anything like that. The next census is not till 2030. So that's another question to answer down the road. But I would encourage people not to write Middle Eastern, not only because it's not an effective term. Remember, Persians, Iranians are Middle Eastern. Turks are Middle Eastern. Israelis are Middle Eastern. So it's not really what we use to describe who we are racially or culturally, right? We're Arabs. But write in whatever you feel, but write in your country. So Middle Eastern is also not good because it's not specific enough. Write in your country. I'm a strong Arab. Like I believe in Arabism. I'm a pan-Arab and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not writing Arab. I'm writing Palestinian because I want the data to come back that we see what countries people are from. And if you're a minority in the Middle East and you don't identify with a country, then write that. If you're Chaldean, write Chaldean. If you're Assyrian, write Assyrian. If you're Kurdish, write Kurdish. But don't write something as large as Arab. Because even under the Latino box, you check Latino and then you write in your country. Well, we don't have a box where we can check Arab and write in our country. We have to check other and write in our country. That's fine. Let's do that so we get the data as specific as possible.
Yeah. A comment on the colonial origins of the term Middle Eastern. There's a comment saying, but Palestinian, Lebanese, and Iraqi are also colonial too. I don't know if you want to expand on that or respond to that.
No, I mean, that's not true. I mean, the term, I don't mean colonial like the borders are colonial. Yes, the borders in the Arab world are colonial. I mean the word. Middle East means east of white people. It's a messed up colonial term. That land has been called Lebanon for centuries. The land has been called Iraq for centuries. Yes, the borders that they drew were drawn by white people, and we should all look at ourselves as a connected Arab nation. Fine. But given the situation that we're in, writing in countries is the best way to identify ourselves on the census. So yes, borders in the Middle East are colonial, but the names of our places, for the most part, are not. But the name Middle East is definitely a colonial term.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. And I think these are actually really good conversations to have now for the next 10 years so that when 2030 does come, we can have the actual representation the way that we want and need it. And so I hope that people continue these conversations. I know these have been debated in academic settings, and I'm glad that they're coming out in more community-centered spaces too, and hoping that these are the conversations that are gonna get us to the change that we need. I want to shift over a little bit because I have a couple questions, and I see a question in the chat about safety. So I'm going to start off with this question and we can kind of get into that. Some Arab Americans are afraid to declare Arabs for fear of being targeted for internment like Japanese Americans. How do you alleviate their concerns?
I don't think I'm going to alleviate their concern other than to say this. The government of the United States of America has been targeting Arab Americans for decades. In fact, there are whole branches of the FBI and other governmental organizations dedicated to monitoring us. Unfortunately, sometimes we participate in these things and following us and all these kinds of things. They don't need census data to know where we are. They know where we are already. So it's not going to come as a surprise. No one who is in the government whose job it is to monitor Arab Americans is going to look at the census data and go, hey, wow, I didn't know there's all these Arabs in Patterson and Ederson. And like, they knew they were there. You know, they know that we're in Dearborn. They know where we are, right? They know where our largest mosques are, where our largest churches are, where our largest community centers are. Like, that is not a mystery to the United States government. They've spent decades tracking us. So the census data is probably going to be a much bigger surprise to us than it is to them. So yes, the government monitors us and tramples on our civil rights and surveils us, but they've been doing that without census data. Census data is not really going to help them in that way.
Yeah.
So it's a valid fear, but the fear exists with or without the census data. So the benefits of having the census data at our disposal greatly outweigh the fears, especially since a lot of those fears are already being realized.
Yeah. And also just emphasizing that all of the information given in the census is only going to be able to be viewed by certain people and cannot be given out beyond that. And the very deep, usually the information that people fear the most are like social security number, et cetera. That is never something that the census would ask you to fill out. And if someone is asking you to give that to them, claiming it's the census, that's not it. And you can know not to do that.
Yeah, your individual census data is protected, but obviously the government is going to have the overall numbers, right? Just like the rest of us will. But yes, your individual census data is protected. But I wouldn't blame people if they felt sort of suspicious that the government might not honor that. I don't blame people for feeling that way. But the truth is they already monitor us and know where we are. So the benefits of getting that census data are going to benefit us a lot more than it benefits the government.
Yeah, and I want to expand on that a little bit because I also see a question in the chat about what are these long-term benefits of having more accurate census? And we've kind of been touching on it, but maybe we can use this time to expand on that and an expansion of, you've been talking about it's going to help us and it's going to help community centers and activists and organizers. So maybe an expansion of what is it really that this is going to allow us to do and give us?
Sure. So, I mean, again, first of all, there's the psychological component, right? That you feel included. So when I go read the census data in a year from now, I'm going to feel much more included in sort of the fabric of America, that I actually see numbers for Palestinians or Arabs at large or Lebanese or whatever. And the Census Bureau takes this stuff seriously. I mean, they break down the Asian category. In 2010, they found out that there were 12 people in America that identified from being from the island of Iwo Jima in Japan. So, I mean, like, they take this stuff seriously and they count it. So us having that data is going to create a stronger sense of belonging, which sometimes is a problem in our community. That's number one. Number two, again, the political argument I made before. If you can present data to politicians and say, look, we are this many people throughout the country, we're this many people in this state, we're this many people in, it's going to help us politically. They're going to respond more to us on the issues that are important to us, whether it's the terrorist watch list, Palestine, Yemen, Iraq, all these different issues. They're much more likely to listen to us when they see real numbers in their districts, in their states. For instance, we know Michigan has probably the highest concentration and percentage of Arab Americans in any state, but we still don't know what the number is. We've been guessing. We know it's big just from looking, but we don't really know, right? So if we had numbers, and it motivates the community. So if the community in New Jersey all of a sudden gets numbers and says, hey, there's 200,000 Arabs in New Jersey, 300,000, 400,000, people might go, oh, wow, I didn't know we were that big of a number. And all of a sudden people become more involved and people become more active in their communities because now they see that there's these real numbers behind what they might be doing, that they're not only working on behalf of a small group of people, they're working on behalf of hundreds of thousands of people. So these kinds of things, I think, are all major, major benefits to us, right? And these are about getting us more energized and involved in the political process. And those alone are enough. There's other reasons, like, now hopefully we can have numbers that we can maybe get designated as minorities for minority business programs, minority loans from banks and the government, all that kind of stuff. We'll also have better numbers for counting, crime statistics, hate crime statistics, all that kind of stuff. It'll be much more clear. And I also imagine that you will have, if we have these census data numbers, which we've never had before, you're going to see all kinds of unique academic research done on Arab Americans over the next decade, which has never been done before. So there's so many benefits, and we could probably think of new ones every day. But definitely the belonging and the political activism ones, I think, are the most important to me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I want to remind folks that you can keep putting questions or comments in the chat, and I'm keeping an eye on both the Zoom chat and the Facebook chat. But this conversation kind of reminded me of a question or comment that I actually personally got while canvassing. And someone was like, well, why do I need to put my information here? They already know that I'm here when I came into the country, or with my green card, my passport, or I pay taxes. Like, why? What is, so I actually kind of even, that's a question that we're getting a lot of. They already know we're here. They know that we've come in. So why the census specifically? How is the census unique?
Well, you have to think of the benefits of filling out the census not as a individual benefit, but as a community benefit. So even if you think they know where you are, they might not know where everybody else is, and we need to have a large number as a community to get all of the benefits that we all are expecting. So even if you think that, as an individual, they might know where you are, do it for that underrepresented Arab American somewhere else who doesn't have that benefit yet. Do it so that we can get the largest number possible, because I, as a political activist, will have much more power dealing in the halls of Congress and Capitol Hill and trying to get better results for, let's say, the Palestinian issue, if that number is 5 million in America than if it's 3 million in America. If it's 7 million, I'll have so fill it out for all those reasons. This is not an individual endeavor. This is a community endeavor. We're trying to get the largest numbers possible. We need to all work together, and we need to fight for like the weakest among us, right? So make sure that you are thinking of this as this, we're all in this together. It's not an individual benefit.
Yeah, and speaking of vulnerability and the most vulnerable, we have a question about citizenship. So do you need to be a citizen to fill it out?
No, the census is very clear on this, that the census counts people, not citizens. And in fact, if everyone remembers, the president was trying to get a citizenship question on the census, and the Supreme Court struck him down because the census doesn't ask about citizens. If the census is for the purpose of apportioning representatives, your congressional representative represents everyone in that district, whether they're citizens or not. So you should fill out the census form no matter what your status is.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I have one more kind of question, and this is a bit more of a personal kind of question for you. And I apologize, I didn't give this to you in my list earlier because I thought of it today, but
is it from my mom? If it's my mom, don't ask it. Okay, all right.
No, I wanted you to share, if you are, why are you personally invested in and working with communities on this? Why are you spending time and energy and having this conversation with us to work on this?
Well, as an activist who works on the Palestine question, and as an activist who tries to get politicians to change their views on Palestine, these numbers will make my job a lot easier. I mean, to be frank, if I'm being personal about it, it makes my job a lot easier. And so I think the numbers, if we got a real accurate count, I mean, the count is going to be an undercount no matter what, because, you know, a lot of people might be afraid to fill out the census. But I think the number of Arab Americans is probably in like the 6 or 7 million range, you know, maybe it'll come out as 4 or 5 in the census. But look, it's better than zero. Our number has always been zero. And so whatever number it is, it's going to be something that we can build off of, and I can build off of in building political power to deal with congressional representatives or state representatives or the president. And it'll help in creating coalitions with other organizations, right? I mean, if I can go to Black and Latino and other kinds of organizations and say, hey, we are now, you know, 5 million people in America. We're not just a few loud people on the sidelines. You know, we're 5 million people in America. If I could have had this numbers when I go to the presidential campaigns now and said, hey, they are, you know, you guys are worried about the state of Michigan. It's a swing state in politics. Well, we just did the census and there's 500,000 Arabs in the state of Michigan, according to the census. Guess what? They're going to reach out to our communities a lot more than they would before. They're going to make us a lot more promises than they have before. So these numbers are extremely important. When you don't have these numbers, and I am working on, you know, on political activism, a lot of times politicians might look at me just as an individual. But if I have those numbers, they'll know that I have, you know, the potential support of millions of people behind me, and that I can potentially influence millions of people, not just me, any activist, right? So it's very, very important to further our political causes. I'm very convinced that the census numbers are going to help us fight for Palestine more effectively in the halls of Congress. That's the most important part of it to me. But it's also going to help us fight for Yemen harder, for all kinds of human rights issues in the Arab world harder, and for our issues here.
Yeah, and that's really powerful. Thank you. We have a question about if you can talk on the direct impact the census has on funding for communities, school, community resources, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, so let's say a school district, you know, is able to show now through census numbers that they have a, you know, 20% of their school is Arabs. You know, they might have known, hey, we have a bunch of Arabs, but they didn't really know how many Arabs live in the district. And they'll be able now to further calculate, okay, I have this many Arabs now, because there's ages on the census too. I have this many Arabs now. In 5 years, there's going to be more Arabs at the school. So now you, as a community activist or community organization, you go to the local school district and say, hey, you better prepare for this. We want more Arabic language material in the schools. Maybe it's an issue of we want halal food in the schools. Maybe it's an issue of we want to make sure that our cultures are represented, our holidays are represented. Well, when you have those numbers, right, you're able to much more effectively do that and get that attention from these local governments. And so it'll directly help in schools, just like it'll directly help in political activism.
Yeah, definitely. And as I want to remind folks that we still have time if you have any last minute questions, but as a general overview for folks who maybe have not filled out the census yet and now want to after this conversation, do you mind taking us through the ways that people can do that to fill it out?
Well, the best way is online. I mean, I think they stopped mailing them. So you just go to the census website, and I think it was mycensus.gov. I mean, you might know better than me. Maybe somebody from your team can put it out there. But I believe it's mycensus.gov. But if you just Google Census 2020, it'll take you directly there. And you can fill it out online for everyone in your household. You know, in the past, the census would hire sort of like armies of people to go to people's houses and make sure that they fill it out. But during the pandemic, it doesn't look like that's going to be possible. So we really need to make a push for people to fill it out online. And it really only takes about 10 minutes to fill it out for you and your whole family online. And make sure that when you go, if you're Arab American, when you go to the race question, go other and write in your country. Don't check white. It even tells you you can write in the white one, Lebanese or Egyptian, like they're giving you Arab examples. Still, don't do it.
Yeah.
Go to other. You know, we want everyone to check other so we can also show the Census Bureau, hey, out of like all the people that identified as being from an Arab country, half of them checked other. So obviously we don't see ourselves as white. So maybe you should give us our own box in the future. So checking other is also an important exercise. So check other and write in your country, and do it for everyone in your household. Yeah, do it online is the best way to do it. You can do it after dinner tonight. It's very easy.
Yeah, and I actually, just from us working very closely with the Census Bureau, they are still going door to door, and they are still planning to do that in the next month. So this is a way, almost, if you don't want them showing up on your door and knocking on your door, then definitely fill it out beforehand.
Yeah, right.
You can do it online. Our census team has been all over every week, Patterson and Clifton. You can always come to PAC. We always have people who can fill it out for you. If you prefer, just tell them your information. There's also ways to do it in Arabic if that is easier. I have a couple more questions, and we'll end with these questions.
Sure.
The first is, what are the consequences of undercounting? And then kind of off of that too, if you can touch on some of the city and federal funding impacts too. What are the impacts of city and federal funding, especially for urban areas like Patterson?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question first. So the city and federal, all funding, you know, even if it's state funding or city, remember, a lot of cities get federal funding and they have to disperse it in ways that are in compliance with federal law. And again, you know, when you have, in a place like Patterson, you're finally going to have numbers, or North Jersey in general, you're finally going to have numbers that show how many Arabs there are. That means when these government agencies, whether they're local or federal, get around to dispersing money, you're going to go to them and you're going to wave a piece of paper with the numbers in front of them and say, hey, you better give us our money. And guess what? They're going to respond to you, because those you know what else those numbers are? Votes. So they're going to respond to you much more effectively than they ever would have before. I mean, this is going to change the world of political activism for Arab Americans. We are going to get so much more. It's going to make our job so much easier. So we really need the community to very, very aggressively participate in this. Man, I know some of those Arab houses out there got like 8, 10, 12, 15 people living in it. Count everybody. Make sure you get everybody. Count everybody. Get everyone on the census. Don't do anything illegal, but get everyone on the census. And I know that there's great organizations like PAC and other organizations out there. We have a lot of them here in Michigan that'll help you fill it out. But really, it's pretty easy. And look, if you are in an immigrant household, I bet you have a 11, 12, 13-year-old Arab American kid in there who reads English very well. They can help you fill out the census. It's not a difficult form. All right. Don't be intimidated by this form. Because, and to answer the other question, the consequences of undercounting are severe. First of all, if you don't fill out the census and you never get your census in and you're not counted, it could hurt your state as a whole. So there's going to be some states, because people have moved out, that are going to lose congressional seats. You know, Michigan probably, we've had a lot of people moving out. We're probably going to go from 14 congressional seats to 13 congressional seats. So you could lose a congressional seat. Your state could lose a congressional seat if they have an undercount. Okay. That's a very, very, and you end up getting your state, and therefore your community ends up getting less funding from the federal government if you have an undercount. But most importantly, again, we don't want to undercount of Arab Americans. We want to get as accurate of a count of every Arab American as we can to help with our issues, from the most local issue at your school board level to all the way in Palestine and Jerusalem. The census data is going to help us deal better with all of those issues. So make sure that you are filling, and don't just make sure, this is a community effort. Don't just make sure if you live in Patterson, that means this house on this side of you and this house on this side of you is probably Arab American too. Go to their house, make sure they fill it out. Make sure everyone on your block has it filled out. We have to make sure we get as high and accurate of a number as possible so that we can empower our community much better over the next 10 years.
Yeah, and we have actually 2 more questions coming in on this idea of what are the real impacts. So there's a quick question about, would it also have any impact on college admission? And then the second one is actually about the foreign policy that you've been talking about. There's a question about, even if we get a more accurate census count, how would that truly impact foreign policy as opposed to all of the well-funded lobbying efforts of those who oppose Palestine and out of foreign policy advocacy?
Sure. So to answer the first question about college admissions, if a college is interested in practicing, diversity admissions, which most colleges are, if they see higher numbers of Arab Americans in society and in the government, then they're going to see us more as valuable parts of their, their diversity goals. And maybe that'll lead to more Arab Americans getting hired in diversity offices throughout universities and more Arab Americans getting admitted to universities to add to the diversity. These numbers are going to benefit all of that greatly. So that's to answer that question. And yes, when it comes to foreign policy, look, yes, there are lobbying groups out there that are don't hold the same foreign policy views that we do. Let me say it like that to be nice. But when we have the real numbers, 2 things will happen. Again, politicians, yes, they respond to lobbying and money, but they also respond to numbers and data and potential votes. Right now, we don't have those numbers. When we do have those numbers, that'll make our cases a lot stronger. Also, if I want to go open a lobbying group tomorrow to help lobby Capitol Hill on behalf of the Palestinian cause, I probably will be able to raise more money from our community if I can say to everyone in our community, hey, you thought Palestinians in America were only like 100,000 people and they were only in like New York and Chicago and San Francisco? Well, guess what? According to the census, Palestinians in America are more like 1 million people, and we're everywhere. And so when you're fighting, you're not only fighting for your village or your mosque or your church or just the people in Patterson or just the people in Chicago. You're fighting for these thousands of Palestinians that live in New Mexico or these thousands of Palestinians that live in Oregon, because we're going to have all those numbers. It'll let us be able to see ourselves more as a sort of national American community and not pockets. And it'll probably make our collective efforts much stronger. So I do believe very strongly that our foreign policy activism work will be made much easier with these census numbers.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Those are all the questions that we had coming in and that I had, and I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you again, Amer, for engaging in this conversation.
Amer, what do you mean respectful of my time? Amer, I'm a stand-up comedian and all my shows have been canceled for 6 months, okay? I don't have anything to do. True. I'm just hanging out in my house in Dearborn. I hang out here all day in front of my computer, and then, maybe I go to a hookah cafe because they finally open, and that's it. Maybe I'll come down to Patterson and hang out with you. Is anything open in Patterson? Are the restaurants open?
Actually, yeah.
Okay, fun. Maybe I'll come out and hang out with Pack. Okay, but listen, you guys can have a meeting with me every day. I have nothing to do, all right? I'm sitting here bored in my house, and this is the most exciting thing I've done, so you don't need to worry about being respectful of my time, okay? I have nothing to do, so, Ronnie and Diab, when they call me up, I'm there. So, I'm always happy to help, but most importantly, I want everybody to know here, I don't care where you are watching from, whether you're watching from New Jersey or you're watching from California or you're watching from Alaska, support PAC New Jersey. Look them up, give them a little donation, give them a shout out. They need our help because they are doing, I get to visit a lot of Palestinian organizations and associations throughout the country. I probably have visited every single one because of my comedy work, and I'm very lucky to have done that. And there are very few groups who reach the level of the community work that PAC is doing, with all the events that they hold and all the ways they always make sure our voices are heard. So please, please, everyone out there in the world, support PAC. make sure you're doing whatever you can to make their work easier so that we can all benefit.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we have so much for it. If you are down to come, we will. I'm sure Danya will give you a lot. I want to echo what's put on the chat. We are doing a lot of voter registration work coming up too. So if you're down to help with that, we will definitely reach out. We do also actually have a fair. I'm going to just shameless plug. We have a mini fair coming up on September 5th, right by PAC, a little farther away. If any of you keep an eye out for that, but if you would like to join us, we'd be more than happy to have you.
Maybe I'll visit
for that too. We'll send you the information.
Wait, you mean like an outdoor fair?
Yeah.
And there'll be like
mini fair for the South Side.
Like food and depke and the whole thing?
We have I don't think we're gonna have depke, but we're gonna have vendors. We're gonna have a food truck. We're gonna have some fun games, some family games and activities too.
I think you can like socially distance depke, right? If everyone stays like 6 feet away and they still go in a circle, I think we can probably figure that out.
Yeah, you should coordinate that. You should come help us coordinate that. We're also going to be giving out free ice cream for anyone who fills out the census. So if you haven't filled it out yet and you need that help, we will have census booths too, and we will be giving out ice cream to folks who fill out.
And to all the men, all the Arab men that are coming to the fair, remember, no kissing, because we're trying to keep everything, we're trying to be very, no holding hands, because Arab men like to hold hands with each other. No holding hands, no kissing, socially distanced, responsible, fair. I'm down.
Yeah, masks required, all of that, definitely.
I'll be there.
Hopefully we'll see you there then.
Okay, thanks, Amer.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.